Well, hello, Nativity Bible Heads. It is Dr. Wayne, and it is time for Sunday Morning Power Bible Study. We are now in the last Sunday after the Epiphany, which means next week we start Lent. Yes. The text of the last Sunday, Epiphany sometimes is longer than others. This year it was only 6 Sundays long. It can be as long as 8 or 9, something like that. Sorry, I realized I have to take my slippers off because my feet were getting sweaty. It can be 8 or 9 Sundays long. This year it was just 6 total. So, and the last Sunday is always the Sunday that we use that Sunday to celebrate the event of the Transfiguration of Jesus. Now, the Old Testament lesson, the first lesson, is from 2 Kings chapter 1. Our psalm comes from Psalm 50. Our epistle reading comes from 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 3 to 6. And then the Transfiguration story for the year B is the one from Mark, which is in chapter 9, verses 2 through 9. Let's start with the King's passage. Now, I think we talked about this a few weeks ago when we had a reading from Samuel. 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings are all one book. It just is so big, it gets broken up into 4 chunks. This portion of it, 2nd Kings, deals with the end of the reign of all the kings of Israel and Judah, okay, and it relates their downfall. In the books of the Kings is where we find the ministries of the prophets Elijah and Elisha, okay? If you want to pronounce it Elisha, you can. I pronounce it Elijah and Elisha, okay? Now, we got introduced to the prophet Elijah back in 1 Kings, and we have been prepared for the fact that there would come a time when Elijah was going to end his ministry and pass it on, his mantle, on to somebody else. We already know that's going to be Elisha, but in the passage that we get today from 2 Kings chapter 2 is when it actually happens. Okay, now, when the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven by a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. This is a semi-travel narrative here. What's significant about Gilgal? Well, you're going to see in all these cities that get named, they are all significant points of interest in the history of Israel taking over the land of promise, okay? And notice we're already told what's going to happen, okay? The idea there that the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven by a whirlwind, that's kind of significant. We've never seen something like this happen before. And so consequently, this is what is going to create the, what's the word? There's that patina around the ministry of Elijah. And the reason why, Elijah shows up as one of those personages that Jesus ends up talking to on the Mount of Transfiguration. Now we know why. Remember, the prophets were intended to be interpreters of the Mosaic Torah, the instruction, the teaching that they received from Moses. And so, we know that already what's going to happen in the Transfiguration narrative in Mark is they're going to see, the disciples that are going to accompany Jesus are going to see Jesus there with who? Moses and Elijah, okay? So, get this. So they were on their way from Gilgal. Gilgal, by the way, was the first place where the Israelites camped out when they first entered the Promised Land. So it was kind of like in the realm of significance, that's what that was about. Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here, for the Lord has sent me as far as Bethel." Okay, Bethel, by the way, that was a place where there was a significant temple for the northern kingdom, the kingdom of the temple of the northern kingdom. Okay, but Elisha said, "As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." That's a simple way of making a vow or an oath, okay? It's not uncommon to see stuff like this, especially in old-timey speak, right? We don't know really why it is that Elijah is telling Elisha to like, okay, I'm moving on, you can stay here. Because he's already given off his ministry to Elisha. Maybe he's in a little bit of a little place of denial about the fact that his ministry is ending, okay? But Elisha said, "As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So we're going to get him saying this a few times now. He knew that he was going to inherit this, and he knew this ministry, and he had a strong sense of now is the time, okay? Get this. So they went down to Bethel. The company of the prophets who were in Bethel came out to Elisha and said to him, "Do you know that today the Lord will take your master away from you?" And he said, "Yes, I know. Keep silent." I like this. So it's like, Elisha knows what he's doing. He knows why he's doing it. He knows the fact that this is kind of a victory tour that Elijah is doing. But he finds this, it appears that he finds this a little bit annoying. It's like, yeah, I know what I know what I'm doing here, okay? Get this. Elijah said to him, "Elisha, stay here, for the Lord has sent me to Jericho." So now they're in Bethel and they're going to Jericho. Jericho is a significant place in the history of the takeover of the Promised Land as well, right? But he said, "As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So again, he's promising, no, I'm not going to just do that. I'm going with. So they came to Jericho. Company of the prophets who were in Jericho drew near to Elisha and said to him, "Do you know that today the Lord will take your master away from you?" And he answered, "Yes, I know. Be silent." Okay, good. This is good storytelling technique. You're going to see this happen 3 times. It's going to happen another. Then Elisha said to him, "Stay here, for the Lord has sent me to the Jordan." But he said, "As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So the two of them went on. 50 men of the company of the prophets also went and stood at some distance from them as they were both standing by the Jordan. The Jordan is another one of those significant places. Remember when the people entered the land originally, they crossed the Jordan, and that was when there was a dry land episode of the Jordan stopping up with the use of the ark. Yeah, that's what the story told us. And here they're back to this significant place where that event happened. Then Elijah took his mantle and rolled it up and struck the water. The water was parted to the one side and to the other until the two of them crossed on dry land. So this is one more of these water crossings. If you look at the history of water crossings in Israel's history, okay, we had the one that led into the wilderness from their slave experience in Egypt, and then we had the one where they entered the Promised Land. Here, they're going, Elijah, he's going the other direction, but again, there's this motif of when you cross in the waters, when you're crossing the waters, there's something significant is about to happen. It's a big deal, okay? And that's why that element is present in this narrative. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me what I may do for you before I am taken from you." Elisha said, "Please, let me inherit a double share of your spirit." He responded, "You have asked a hard thing, yet if you see me as I am being taken from you, it will be granted you. If not, it will not." I have a feeling that Elisha already knew this, and that's the reason why he was so committed to being and staying with Elijah all this time, right? I mean, so consequently, to say that, okay, well, you're doing the right thing, staying with me, so as long as you keep to what you've committed yourself to, you'll get that. As they continued walking and talking, a chariot of fire and horses of fire separated the two of them. If you can imagine, it kind of like this apparition of like sweeping down out, separating the two of them, and Elijah ascended in the whirlwind into heaven. It doesn't say that he necessarily got up into the chariot, although maybe that's presumed. But this whirlwind of a thing with the chariots and the horses, Elijah goes with that. Elisha kept watching and crying out, "Father, Father!" This is a typical, in a mentor-mentee relationship, it wasn't uncommon to refer to the mentor as father, and for the mentor to refer to the mentee as son. "Father, Father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen." It's an exclamation of, basically, he's just shouting out of what he's seeing, okay? But when he could no longer see him, he grasped his own clothes and tore them in two pieces. This is what you do. You rend your garments when you are going through an experience of grief, okay? Something that you would do at somebody's death. Okay, so this parting is like a death. It's as good as a death, even though he doesn't have a body to bury, but yet he is behaving in such a way as one would in grieving a loss of a loved one. And that's the end of the story. So why do we have this story as a precursor first lesson for Transfiguration Sunday? Because in the Transfiguration, we're going to get this ultimate manifestation of who Jesus is. And one of the people that Jesus converses with on this mountain is Elijah. And so he had, and he is that supreme interpreter. He is Moses was the one who received it, and Elijah represented the supreme interpreter of the law. And Jesus ends up being that which is superior to both of them. Okay, so this is just a way of reminding us of this. Also, the whirlwindish thing and the whole phantasmagorical nature of it is a little bit similar to the experience of our disciples that we're going to get. But that's coming up. Let's look now at our Psalm. Psalm 50, just the first 6 verses. We've seen Psalm 50 not too long ago, actually. It was like back in the Pentecost season. I think it was Pentecost season. Verses 7 to 15, but here we're just getting verses 1 through 6. Psalm 50. The Lord, the God of gods, has spoken. He has called the earth from the rising of the sun to its setting. Out of Zion, perfect in its beauty, God reveals himself in glory. Now, I hope you're getting a little bit of picture of this is the disciples kind of had this experience with Jesus, did they not, on the Mountain of Transfiguration? Our God will come and will not keep silence. Before him there is a consuming flame, and round about him a raging storm. We saw the chariots of flame and horses of fire, right? He calls the heavens and the earth from above to witness the judgment of his people. And now we quote God speaking. Gather before me, my loyal followers, those who have made a covenant with me and sealed it with sacrifice. So we have an expression that about God, and then we hear God speak. And then we have this: let the heavens declare the rightness of his cause, for God himself is judge. Not a whole lot to meat on that bone, is there? But I hope you can see how that can be something that is an appropriate response to what we saw with the Elijah episode, and the fact that it once again emphasizes how God is the actor in all of it, okay? All right, we're going to move on now to the epistle passage. Just 4 verses, 3, 4, 5, verses 3, 4, 5, and 6. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, okay? A lot of times in these Sundays where there's a special emphasis in the gospel, we get shorter readings outside of it, and that kind of follows true today. 2 Corinthians chapter, okay, so we've been reading out of 1 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians is more of Paul. This is considered to be one of his most personal letters. We don't necessarily get that from this segment that we're going to read today, but we do get a very theologically significant portion of this epistle. And even if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing. Last week we heard of him talking about himself as partnering with the gospel, and the gospel is the message of the gospel is like unto the temple of God. That's the kind of respect we should have with it, right? Because the temple was something that everybody could see, but the gospel is not something tangible, right? So he's describing it here as something that is veiled, that people can't see. It is veiled to those who are perishing. You can see him saying that those who aren't getting it, it just doesn't mean that the gospel isn't real. It just means that it's obfuscated from them, right? In their case, the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. Okay? Now, think about this in terms of the transfiguration, right? What do we see? We're going to see Jesus, and there's going to be his face is going to be shining super bright. And so this thing reminds us of, who is the image of God? That is Jesus, right? Well, that's what this reminds us of in this passage. For we do not proclaim ourselves, we proclaim Jesus Christ as Lord, and ourselves as your slaves for Jesus' sake. For it is the God who said, "Let light shine out of the darkness," who has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. So notice how he plays the creation card. The creator God. This is one of the defining things of the God of the New Testament and the God of the Old Testament, is the assertion of Israel's God is the God of creation, okay? And so in Paul, in playing that creation card, he's going all the way back to that. And it is Jesus who we experience as the light of the world, right? For it is the God who said, "Let light shine out of the darkness," who has shown in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. Later on, he's going to go on to talk about how that light that is in our hearts, that is shown in our hearts, it basically takes us back to creation, to the fact that we are a new creation. We aren't what we used to be when we get conscious of who we are in Christ and when we're following Christ. For it is the God who said, "Let light shine in the darkness," who has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. This reference to the face of Jesus Christ, again, this is something that we're going to see in the gospel. We got to get to the gospel here. I probably should have started with it, because so much of the other readings are only there because they reiterate an element of the transfiguration. So let's go to it, shall we? In Mark chapter 9, verses 2 through 9. Now, this is that middle section of the Gospel of Mark. In this middle section of the Gospel of Mark, Jesus does something new, and that is he predicts what's going to happen, and he tells them that he is the kind of Messiah who is going to be killed and on the third day rise up again. He tells them that like 3 times, okay? And the disciples aren't going to get it, okay? This incident here is going to be something that is supposed to give them the idea of who Jesus is in the big picture of what God has been doing since the beginning of God's relationship with Israel. 6 days later, we don't know 6 days later than what, by the way. The way the narrative goes, it's kind of like it doesn't really say much to give us a context for what's with the 6 days. It could simply mean that as a reminder that, on the 7th day, what happened? Of creation, what happened? God rested, right? Well, also on the 6th day, what happened was the creation of humankind. So maybe there's something there in why Mark is using this demarcation. Jesus took with him Peter and James and John. No Andrew. Remember, Peter and Andrew came as a couple because they're brothers. James and John came together, right? But no Andrew. Just Peter, James, and John, and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. Remember how in the Elijah passage we had Elisha as the one who he knew he was going to inherit the ministry? Well, is it possible that we have these 3 listed, who are the most oft-named disciples that accompany Jesus, Peter, James, and John? Is it possible that it's trying to say that they're kind of like being successors in some way, like Elisha wasn't a successor to Elijah? Is that possible? Consider that. And he was transfigured before them. The word transfigured there is metamorphosed. It just means to be changed, okay? Does it mean that that's what actually happened, or is that was just what they saw? We don't really know, and quite frankly, the question isn't even a valid question in this sense, because the significance is what happens with the disciples and what they see and what they are witness to. Get this. And his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. This is a definite sign that what we have afoot here is an epiphany of sorts, okay? And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Notice it's speaking from the perspective of Peter, James, and John. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. And I already talked about the significance of Elijah and Moses. Moses was the supreme lawgiver, the one who received it. And Elijah represented the creme de la creme of the prophets, who were the interpreters of the Torah that spoke truth to power and reinterpreted and enforced the instruction of God from the Mosaic Torah. Verse 5. Then Peter said to Jesus, Rabbi. By the way, the word rabbi is an untranslated word. That's the way it's spelled, rabbi in Greek, and it literally means teacher. You could also translate it as teacher. It is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. We get the feeling that Peter is the spokesperson for the rest of the disciples most of the time. And here we can probably simply take that that what he's saying is an expression of what any or all of the disciples would respond with. Okay, so he's basically saying like, oh, isn't this great? Let's preserve this in a monument so we can remember it. And what does the narrator say next? He did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Which means to say that what he said was totally off base. He totally wasn't picking up on the gravitas of the moment. But what happens if you go to this Mount of Transfiguration today? You're going to see a big old cathedral, and they have a wing for Moses. They have a wing for Elijah. I went to both of them, visited both of them. He did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them. Okay, get the cloud. Remember, we had that whirlwind with the Elijah passage. And from the cloud, there came a voice. We've heard a heavenly voice once before in the Gospel of Mark, just once. And it was when? It was at the baptism. And in the baptism, the voice said, "You are my son, my beloved, in whom I am well pleased." Here, it is not in the second person. It is different. Look at this. Then from the cloud there came a voice. "This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him." Yeah, I think that's what's important here. Listen to him. Remember, they had seen Jesus talking with Moses and Elijah. In the baptism, that was a confirming moment for Jesus, for him to know his ministry of who he was in the big picture as a confirmation before he started his ministry. Now we have something. This is happening not for Jesus. It is happening for the disciples for their personal understanding. Hopefully that they will get something, some insight out of this. They're supposed to realize from what they've seen here that God is telling them that Jesus is the ultimate expression of what God has always been about. We don't need to be about simply preserving the past laws and the past interpretations of the law just for the sake of the law. We want to see what God is doing now. How is God speaking afresh now? And in this moment, what we are being told by what God is telling the disciples is, this is my fullest manifestation, okay? God's presence was always felt in the teaching and in the law and in the interpretation of it. This, in what he's doing in Jesus, is like a confirmation of it. That's the reason why in John's gospel, he will use the expression that Jesus is Jesus as the Word of God. Who is the Word of God? Jesus is the Word of God. That person who is the ultimate expression of the divine eternity. Yeah, right? This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him, okay? This is the point at which we believe that God is saying, I'm all in with what Jesus is doing. We're taking all of what Moses and Elijah did. Yeah, we're putting it all in that one bag. But Jesus is the ultimate interpreter of what I'm up to, God is saying. Suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one with them anymore, but only Jesus. Yeah. So it's like those two. So it's like they were, Moses and Elijah must have still be then, but then the voice said, "This is my son, listen to him," right? So it's time for Moses. It's time for Moses and Elijah to go, right? And so that's the reason why they don't see them anymore, right? As they were coming down the mountain, he ordered them to tell no one about what they had seen until after the Son of Man had risen from the dead. Part of the reason why we have this urge by Jesus to hush after these big manifestations is because he knows that they can't grasp the totality of it. The main thing that has to happen for it all to make sense is his death and resurrection, which hasn't happened yet. And the disciples, aren't even, they've been told that's going to happen, but they're in denial about that it is going to happen. Remember when Jesus said this has to happen, and Peter rebuked him for it, and then Jesus said to him, "Hey, get behind me, Satan." So they don't have the full picture. He doesn't want to be spread about as some divine figure without the understanding of going through what the cross event happens with the death and with the resurrection. Jesus doesn't make sense. Jesus is just another popular teacher, he's just a popular prophet before the resurrection, before the crucifixion, burial, and resurrection. So that's one of the reasons why we see these hush things. As they were coming down, he ordered them to tell no one about what they had seen until after the Son of Man had risen from the dead. It wasn't going to make sense to anybody until then. And that's the reason why we have this when we do. In other years on Transfiguration Sunday, sometimes we'll have a passage from one of the Petrine epistles, one of the epistles written by Peter, and we have Peter saying, "Oh, we beheld his glory. We actually saw it." So Jesus knows that their participation in what they just saw right now, he knows that what it was supposed to show about about his identity, but he also knew that they would not get the full understanding of it or the gravitas of it until he went through the death and the resurrection. So those are our Transfiguration Sunday texts. I think I'm preaching on this day. We'll see. So until next time, peace.